as a goal of Bitcoiners should be relatively accessible financial privacy when using Bitcoin, because you never know when your individual government, might not be my government, might not be Safe's government, but when your individual government decides that you're a criminal and they want to take your Bitcoin, they want to pressure you and your family, they want to track your transactions, we should have tools available to them to make it easier for them to use Bitcoin privately. That is basically my frame.
Well, yeah, and again, we're going back to the same kind of discussion that I had with Giacomo, which is I agree on this being a goal. But again, the question is now, let's take out the criminal. Let's say a political dissident that you actually like. Do you feel comfortable enough telling them to hide their tracks from their government on Bitcoin? This is, I'd like it to be there. But I think, realistically...
That's my frustration. I agree with you.
Yeah.
My frustration is I spend 45 minutes with them and I barely scratch the surface on what they need to keep in mind when trying to use Bitcoin in an adversarial environment like that.
And and you're much more technically qualified than me, so I would not be able to spend the 45 minutes doing as good of a job as you would. But I think that there's an element of, first do no harm, which you need to keep in mind. And I wonder whether you might actually be making it more likely that they get caught if they think that they are able to use Bitcoin privately. I think perhaps there is a little bit of overselling the case, and I was being a little bit provocative with Giacomo, but maybe
well, that's rare.
Yeah, but I mean, like maybe this is the new coffee. There was a time when we all wanted we all thought on-chain transactions are the free coffee, but like maybe privacy is just not as attainable for the vast majority of users. I mean, I think I can see, why if you've had an old stash that you had for a long time with no KYC, it's easier for you to hide your tracks. But like, you're talking to a political dissident in somewhere and you're telling them, hey, use this.
No, I think it's the opposite case. I think the coffee transactions, that Bitcoin is great for low fee instant transactions on chain. Selling point was obviously bullshit and trade-offs weren't disclosed properly. I think at the same time, early Bitcoin, we saw a lot of people saying it was anonymous internet money with no trade-offs, that you just didn't have to worry about it and you could just use it.
A lot of people are in jail because of that.
Right. And the reason is because they were making mistakes because they weren't aware of the trade-offs. And I think we've seen a lot of productive conversation around using Bitcoin privately more recently over the last 3 years or so, where most privacy advocates in Bitcoin are very clear with the trade-offs. If anything, to a fault. Like I get on all the time about fudding Bitcoin, creating fear, uncertainty, doubt, and talking shit about Bitcoin, and people accuse me of pushing people into shitcoins or pushing people out of Bitcoin and stuff. Like, I'm one of the most bullish Bitcoin people ever, but I feel compelled that when I talk about using Bitcoin privately, to explain all the trade-offs and explain all the risks. And I think most people in the Bitcoin privacy community are pretty good about that. And I would just say that if our goal here is creating a money that's independent of corporations and states, and is immune to that kind of pressure, that is truly censorship resistant, we should not be tied to our Bitcoin balances. Our real life identity should not be tied to our legal names, should not be tied to our Bitcoin balances. And the question is like, okay, so we can go through a million different scenarios about how a sophisticated state would attack Bitcoin, but if we can't stop, the U.S. government from just sending every American either a letter saying, we're taking your Bitcoin, and if you don't give it to us, we're throwing you in jail, or a letter saying we're going to humbly take 70% of your Bitcoin because of this new sin tax we passed because you guys are causing inflation, then what the fuck are we doing here? Like, that is like, we talk about cold storage, we talk about using your node, we talk about all this other stuff. Well, the low-hanging fruit for a state to take your Bitcoin is to just know how much Bitcoin you have and be like, you are going to jail unless you give us this much Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think I think that is a realistic and possible attack scenario we should be prepared for. Obviously, it's not something that is that we would enjoy, but I think it might be the bargain that we need to strike with the fiat world in order to if Bitcoin keeps going up, I can see with almost certainty at least some governments are going to do this. There's going to come a point in some country, I've said this before, there will come a point at which the Bitcoin that exists on the Bitcoin exchanges is more valuable than the foreign currency reserves that exist in that country's central bank. And at that point, there's a switch that's going to flick in the head of the president or the prime minister or the whoever's in charge of the country, which is, hang on a second, we've only got $2 billion of US dollars left in our bank, but there's $8 billion of Bitcoin in all of these crypto exchanges. And I think, that's why keeping your Bitcoin on, that's why I've said this many times, only keep on exchanges the Bitcoin you're comfortable giving to your government. I think that's really going to be the low-hanging fruit. Once one government sees that, hey, hang on a second, we could triple our foreign reserves assets by just taking half of the money from these Bitcoin exchanges, I think it's going to happen. And that's why I think, this is one of the other things to keep in mind, to go back to our original discussion on self-custody. That's one of the many risks involved with having it in an exchange. One day your president wakes up and says, Bitcoin is causing global warming and inflation and killing the baby seals, and therefore we need to take 70% of your Bitcoin so that we can cause inflation and kill baby seals with you. So bear that in mind in your scenario. No, I agree with you.
I just think I 100% agree that we're going to see a lot of sovereign rug pulls where they're going to go in and just basically, we've seen them do it to people's bank accounts already, and it's just going to be more of that. But I would just say, if you should absolutely self-custody. It's a significant improvement, like not even close to holding it with a regulated third party in terms of state resistance. But if you just buy on Coinbase, connect it to your identity, and then send it one hop out to your Ledger wallet or cold card or whatever you're using for cold storage, and take no kind of privacy precautions whatsoever, is enforcement to steal that money more difficult than clicking a button and taking it from an exchange? Yes. Is it that much more difficult? Like, no, it's not that much more difficult. They pressure what I see happening is you pressure a couple big guys. You do kind of what happened with torrents. You pressure a couple big guys. You make an example out of them. 90% of people comply. They didn't have to go store to store to close people's businesses down during COVID. They told people that they were going to get fined if they kept them open. And a couple people didn't listen to them that were big businesses, and they went to those businesses and they made a huge example of them, and 95% of people complied and they closed their small business.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I'm not saying that they won't do it, but I think, in terms of the laws and traditions of particularly Western democracies, for all of the problems that we have about them, I think the concept of property rights is still one of those things that has not been completely eradicated. So the money that's in the bank, it's all fake money and it's all made up. And the idea that the government is just going to confiscate the reserves at the banks has already happened in 1934. And until today, here we are almost 90 years later, the vast majority of Americans don't know that it happened or don't understand its significance. And they just think it was, somebody did something with the back end of our monetary system where they decided they were just going to, change the way that they handled gold. But anyways, I don't understand that. But really what it was is that they took away about 40% of society's gold. And the government confiscated 40% of the society's gold by revaluing it and taking all the gold that was in the banks and giving people papers. Could they have gotten away with that if they had gone door to door, having to take the gold from everybody's house? And also knowing that the gold was digital, meaning that it could be hidden in people's skulls, or it could be, it's much easier to hide. I think the politics of door-to-door confiscation is much, much, much more complicated than just, getting a bunch of idiots on TV, a bunch of Keynesians on TV who say, oh, we figured out that we're going to fix your, all of the problems. We figured out the solution. The solution is we're just going to have to take money from the banks. don't bother. You're still going to have more dollars.
Well, I mean, look, that's why I think enforcement is you make an example out of few people and most people comply. Once again, the Bitcoin ledger is forever, right? First of all, as you just mentioned, we had Executive Order 6102 in America. The people that weren't on lists of gold owners were not affected. The people that were listed as gold owners were known to be committing what I think it was a felony at the time, but committing whatever crime they decided you were committing. People that had in the bank obviously just immediately got a haircut. So there's different layers there, right? Everything has trade-offs. There's different risk balance. People should keep that in mind. But then the second precedent we have is we actually in America, I'm an American. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are Americans, and it's probably pretty similar in their country as well. If we enter a hyperinflationary period today, the way our tax system is set up in America is our top end cap gains rate is between 30 to 40%, depending which state you live in. Okay. If we enter a hyperinflationary period and 100% of your wealth is in Bitcoin, then you are a criminal unless you give the government 40% of your Bitcoin. But literally no rules need to change. So that is the current status quo of American Bitcoin policy, in my opinion, right? Is nearly half of your Bitcoin will be seized from you under threat of violence. You will get thrown in jail if you don't pay your taxes. I'm saying everyone should pay their taxes. I'm not telling people they shouldn't pay the taxes, but that's the current status quo as it is today. And that gets very malicious in a hyperinflationary environment.
Absolutely.